Hey kitchen besties, welcome back to the Floral Apron. If you've been looking into the Cuisinart FastFreeze, today I'm going to tell you everything you need to know before purchasing it. I have made a number of traditional ice creams, high protein ice creams, and sorbets in the 6 months since I purchased it from Cuisinart for $120. There's a bit of a learning curve and a good amount of prep time involved, which made the novelty of the FastFreeze wear off pretty quickly for me. However, I can also see why a lot of people really love the FastFreeze, so I'm going to do my best to give a fair and balanced review no matter which camp you belong to. Because it's more than just an ice cream maker and takes up such little space in my kitchen, I am going to keep it, which means today is the day I get to throw the box away, which brings me great joy. But let me tell you why I am so torn over the FastFreeze. First, I highly recommend watching my unboxing video and then coming back to this one so that you get the basics of how to use it in a linear fashion. This video is going to be a lot more in the weeds, covering specific aspects about what makes it great for some and not so great for others. And we're just gonna pretend I didn't make that comment about getting the video out before the holidays, okay? Okay. I recognize that you have a lot of options when it comes to product reviews, and I really appreciate you choosing mine over or in addition to others. I want to do my best to respect your time so that you know upfront if this product will be a good fit for you. That's why I always start with the cons. If something isn't going to work for you, you'll know early on instead of having to listen to me talk about how great it was for 20 minutes first. I'll also share some helpful tips and ways to upgrade, which will share optional accessories available for purchase. I'll have those affiliate links below if you'd like to use them to support me and my channel. But if you'd rather purchase through another retailer or you don't want to purchase the FastFreeze at all, that's totally fine too, no pressure. Now, as is tradition, here are the cons. Number one, prep time. All of the ads I've seen for the FastFreeze have said ice cream in 5 minutes. But I think that's a little misleading because it totally omits planning ahead. You can't just decide that you want protein ice cream and then make it in that 5 minutes. There's prep, freezing, thawing, and processing time involved, which all takes significantly longer than 5 minutes, usually at least 10 hours. So you are not getting that protein ice cream anytime soon unless you already have one prepped in the freezer. Now, technically, if that base is prepped, you can have a frozen dessert in about 5 minutes, but it has to be a base that doesn't require partial thawing first, like traditional ice cream. Any high protein or low fat base is going to have a required thaw time of 10 and sometimes 20 minutes. It is inactive time, but it's still time that has to pass. If I decide at 7 p.m. that I'm gonna have high protein ice cream, the soonest I could possibly have it would be 7:15, not 7:05 because of that 10-minute thaw time. So it's not ice cream in 5 minutes, it's more like ice cream in 15 to 20 minutes tomorrow. Which I get doesn't sound quite as catchy, but it's accurate. The second aspect with prep time is that the FastFreeze is not designed to mix liquids or blend anything together. The blade isn't sharp enough to cut through really stringy fruit like pineapple, and it's not designed to blend your dry protein powder into already frozen yogurt. You have to whisk or blend the base in a separate container first. Now, sometimes that's just a measuring cup and a shaker bottle, but other times it's an immersion blender, 3 measuring cups, a measuring spoon, and a spatula, and at that point, it's a significant number of dishes for what's going to make 1 to 2 servings of a dessert tomorrow. If calories are not a concern, it feels a lot more efficient to me to spend the same amount of time prepping and cleaning traditionally churned ice cream for 10 servings of a dessert tomorrow and the next 9 days. Number 2, the learning curve. There's a learning curve, both to figure out the ideal thawing time and the ideal processing method, because they're not the same for each recipe. I'll cover this more in depth in a bit, but the lower calorie ice creams were a lot more difficult for me to get where I wanted them texturally without a lot more prep time or ingredients. For some people, that's not going to be an inconvenience, but it was for me. I have gotten the best consistencies with recipes that are either high in fat or sugar, or even better, both. And you need at least one of the two for a less icy texture and a richer mouthfeel, unless you are adding a stabilizer or a thickener. Fat doesn't freeze quite as solidly as water, and sugar lowers the freezing temperature of a mix. Both of those work to help break up ice crystals for that traditional ice cream texture. If you don't have sugar or fat, it's going to taste like something is missing compared to traditional ice cream. Now, I say that as somebody who is not currently in a calorie deficit. If you're tracking your macros and you just can't make traditional ice cream fit into your diet, I think the FastFreeze would be a pretty good option for you because it does get close and it can satisfy that craving. Number 3, the manual. The manual is better than past Cuisinarts, I will give it that. There are pictures, and I was able to turn on the FastFreeze on my first try, which is more than I can say about the custom 14 food processor. There is still not enough information where it counts to reduce the learning curve. After you've processed a few batches, it's pretty intuitive, but those first few batches, you're going in blind, and the manual does not provide clear enough information about how to process mixes, which I think should be the entire point of the manual. For your first impression of the FastFreeze, the only guidelines are processing time will vary, however most recipes should take 1 to 3 minutes. An additional cycle or 2 may be required. What is a cycle? I really wish Cuisinart defined that term more clearly. At my first read through, I thought a cycle was going up and down exactly once, because that's what's covered in steps 10 through 13. Well, 10, 12, and 13 because they're missing 11. The first time I used it, I thought I was being excessive because I was going up and down more than 3 times, even though it was icy and it definitely still needed even more processing time after that. It would have made more sense to me to say an additional 3 to 6 minutes may be required to really hone in on that time-based processing rather than whatever a cycle is. And then also give some examples for specific recipes. The booklet includes a dozen recipes for all different kinds of bases, but the thawing and processing time is largely copy and pasted from one to another with no real editorial input. And the recipes also don't have nutrition facts. Normally, I wouldn't count this against a product, but for a product advertising smaller portions and higher protein dessert options, it seems like that would have been really helpful information for their users to have, especially because that information is included for the custom 14 food processor with a much wider audience base. Number 4, cleanup. As a whole, the cleanup isn't that bad. I'm the creator of a food blog where every recipe has a cleanup rating and a photo of the dirty dishes, so I'm very practical about cleanup. You can tell that the FastFreeze was thoughtfully designed so that there aren't a bunch of moving pieces you have to disassemble every time to thoroughly clean it. The containers are dishwasher safe, so this is really easy. All that's left for hand washing is the mixing assembly and whatever dishes you used to make the base. You're supposed to rinse the mixing assembly in water under tap water after exposing the blade shaft, then dry it. There's no mention of using soap, which I think has surprised some people, but rinsing does do a fine job to clean it. I haven't noticed any residues, smells, or things growing on the FastFreeze. But my biggest complaint with cleanup is that the blade shaft is really hard to push out to rinse it. The spring is just stiff and it's not comfortable to push down. It always leaves an indent on my thumb. But there is residue on the blade shaft after processing, so you don't want to skip rinsing it. I think it would help if there was some silicone or plastic cover that you could affix on top while cleaning to make it a bigger button instead of such a small pointy surface area. My second complaint is that after a couple of uses, I noticed a bit of grease around the washer at the top of the blade shaft. And a couple months later, I could also see grease collecting on the inside of the mixing assembly. Grease is necessary to lubricate moving parts, and I don't believe there's been any contact with food, so I'm not too worried about the food safety aspect. Even then, H1 lubricants are safe for human consumption in very small amounts. My concern is that as more of this grease leaks out over time, there's less inside to lubricate what it needs to lubricate, and perhaps it won't work quite as well down the road. It could just be that mine got too much at the factory, so this is just excess making its way out, but I've wiped it down a few times and it keeps coming back. My cleaning tip is that it's helpful if you have a faucet with a pull-down sprayer to help clean the blade more horizontally. Then your dirty water doesn't overflow into the center of the mixing assembly. I originally was worried about water draining into the center because the manual doesn't mention if it's safe to get this center part wet. However, there are drainage holes, so I'm choosing to believe that the designers at Cuisinart knew that some water would overflow during cleaning and put those drainage holes in just in case. They just don't tell you that, and they don't make it easy to clean the center. It's too deep and narrow for my fingers, and my hands are even on the smaller side. If you're worried about rinsing it but still need to wipe it down due to grease or something, I move a damp paper towel around with a chopstick, and that works really well to make contact with both the sides and the bottom. You're supposed to dry thoroughly, but I just let it air dry after flicking it a few times to get excess water out. Realistically, the water that is going to be the most problematic to this part is inside where you can't reach, so I don't see the point of drying it just for cosmetics. As a whole, I think the cleanup is reasonable and actually easier than my traditional ice cream maker and what I've seen for the Ninja Creami, but I want you to know what to expect going in. The majority of my complaints can be boiled down to a learning curve and prep time. For a lot of people, I don't think that's going to be a deal breaker, especially if you're curious about or really love high protein frozen desserts in smaller portions. It probably would have been for me, but these pros are what allowed the FastFreeze to keep its place in my kitchen. Water time. Number 1, noise levels. I have already shared my thanks to the Cuisinart team for making the FastFreeze so quiet, but allow me to do it again. Thank you. I can hold a conversation with my husband while using the FastFreeze, and that has not been the case for any other micro puree machine I have seen. If you live in an apartment complex, you don't have to worry about irritating your neighbors with the noise, and if you have small children, you'd probably be able to mix something up after they've gone to bed with no issues. It's not silent by any means, but for what it's doing, I'm really impressed that it's this quiet. Number 2, compact size. I've gone over this in my unboxing video, but the entire FastFreeze ensemble takes up very little space. I fit the power handle and the mixing assembly in this little space in my cabinet, but you could even store them in a drawer. And if you store the cups next to them, it only adds another couple inches. If you don't have room for these in your house, the manual says you could also store them in the freezer. Speaking of, that leads me to number 3, the containers. These feel like the right size to me. The opening is wide enough to fit an ice cream scoop if you want to serve your frozen dessert in different bowls. And that can be nice because condensation forms on the sides of the containers and drips if you're passing it back and forth on the couch. Or drip on the manual. It'll vary depending on the person, but for me, this is the perfect size to split with richer desserts like traditional ice cream. Pretty much everything else, sorbets, high protein mixes, milkshakes, and slushies, I could polish one off on my own. And they're dishwasher safe, which is my favorite aspect, but if you have to clean them by hand, they're really easy to do so if you rinse them with warm water right after using. The inside walls are smooth, so you don't have to worry about cleaning all of these ridges. And the bottom is smooth except for these small indents, which I think are to improve circulation while processing. Just note that some ingredients like vanilla bean will settle in these holes while freezing if they're small enough. Additional containers retail at $20 a pair. They were not sold separately when I purchased it originally, but they are now. There are also some retailers like Costco that sell the FastFreeze with 4 dessert cups instead of the traditional 3. In my experience, if I have leftovers of a smoothie or traditional ice cream that I want to store in a dessert cup for processing later, I will find that I already have all 3 filled in my freezer, like I do right now. So that 4th or 5th dessert cup would be really nice to have. Number 4, operation. There's basically just one setting, and that is on. You do have different presets, but they really only change RPM from what I can tell. I've forgotten to switch ice cream to sorbet before, and my sorbet still turned out great. You'll really only be able to tell a difference if you use something like mix-in when you should be using ice cream. And you don't have to push hard at all to get the wand to move down. Just the weight of your hand pressing the power button is usually enough. If you have to push much harder, that's probably a sign that your mix hasn't thawed enough. Learned that in my unboxing. Or you need to add a little more liquid. And I think the nicest thing about it is that it's all totally in your control. If you get part way and realize that it needs a little more thaw time, you can bring it up to the top, disconnect, and give it that thaw time. If you decide that you only want to process the top half of a mix because that's all you're gonna eat, you can do that too. And if you want to mix something in, you can do that in about 10 seconds. It's really nice. Number 5, presets. And this is gonna be a long one. Ice cream as a whole performed pretty well, but each base performed differently. For traditional custard-based ice cream, I think it's slightly less good than traditionally churned ice cream, but the difference is minimal. If you process the mix long enough, it's smooth and pretty comparable to regular ice cream. It's just the slightest bit denser because you're not adding air into it while freezing. You're adding it after it's already frozen. I didn't like how melty traditional ice cream got if I gave it that full 10-minute thaw time from the freezer. I had the best results processing it straight from the freezer so long as I added an extra cycle of processing time. I actually don't think that thaw time is necessary for traditional high sugar, high fat ice cream that's stabilized with egg yolks. I also tried the chocolate Fairlife again. Since it is so low in fat and sugar, I left it out for a full 20 minutes before processing. It turned out a lot better than the last time, but it was still best with a little bit of liquid Fairlife mixed back in after processing. There was a subtle iciness I couldn't process away that I didn't feel with other high protein ice creams that were higher in fat. So I think that's just the result of a low fat, low sugar mix without any thickeners. Traditional frozen yogurts processed really nicely. I loved the blueberry cheesecake frozen yogurt recipe from the manual. That was probably the best ice cream that I have had from this book. From what I remember, the texture was improved with letting it thaw first, but it was fine without it too. Again, just an extra cycle. On the other hand, high protein, low sugar frozen yogurt was good. That 10-minute thaw time was definitely necessary. I made the chocolate protein ice cream with a few different kinds of protein powder to see if there was a clear winner. Between plant-based, whey, and casein, the casein had the best, fluffiest texture of the three, but all of them were good. The whey took slightly longer to process than the others into a really nice consistency, but it was only like a minute or two. They were all a little icy compared to traditional ice cream, but it was better than I expected for high protein and low sugar. High protein, high fat ice cream, on the other hand, absolutely delicious. I made the banana split protein ice cream from the manual, and it has an incredible consistency for how much protein is in the mix. And the texture was stretchy, which I didn't even think was possible with processed ice cream. Flavor was a little strong on the banana for me, and it made more than one serving, which I thought was odd, but it just meant that I had leftovers for another time. However, it is not low calorie. I think it would be ideal if you just wanted to add some protein to a regular dessert, but I would not recommend substituting it for a post-workout protein shake unless you're really trying to make some big gains. It is 800 calories for one container. Sorbet. I have been really impressed with these. My first attempt was a little icier than I would have hoped because it was straight from the freezer, but all future attempts have been nothing less than stellar. The thing I like especially about sorbets with the fast freeze is that you don't have to pit 5 pounds of cherries or spend $20 on raspberries to make a full batch of sorbet. If you picked up 1 or 2 peaches at the farmer's market because those were the best ones that they had, you can make a sorbet from that alone. And I don't know of another traditional ice cream maker that can do that. There's a recipe starter guide towards the back of the manual that has been really helpful for making up recipes on a whim. I used it as the guideline to make raspberry sorbet, and it was grand. Now, I personally would recommend using a rich syrup rather than a simple syrup for sorbets. The less water you have, the less it'll dilute the flavor and the less icy it'll be. So instead of a 1-to-1 sugar-water ratio, I use a 2-to-1 sugar-water ratio and use only a couple tablespoons instead of the 1/4 cup. That gives me a similar amount of sugar with a bit less water. Mix-ins. I was more impressed than I thought I was going to be for this. I was expecting more pulverization, but it actually kept decently sized chunks suspended throughout the entirety of the mix. There is about a 1/4 inch on the bottom that doesn't get fully mixed in unless you mix for a while in the red, but for the most part it worked really well to break up larger mix-ins into bite-sized pieces evenly distributed throughout the mix. From videos I've seen, this is an improvement over the Creami. Usually you have to dig a crater in the center and still run a full cycle or 2 in order to get everything to mix. That is not the case here. There is no excavating involved, just plop everything in and process. Slushy. For a homemade slushie, the ice crystals were really consistent in size and shape, and it didn't melt really quickly. Both of those, very big pluses. I was able to sip an apple cider slushie with a straw, which was really nice. It's not quite as fine as a Slurpee, but it's closer than anything else I have made at home, so I'm happy with that. And milkshake. This is where the fast freeze really shined for me. I have tried to make milkshakes in the blender before and they just always come out and they don't have a nice even consistency. They're lumpy and icy and just not what you can get at a restaurant. My first try with the fast freeze though, perfectly smooth, easy to sip with a straw, mixed consistently, and the perfect portion size for me. 10 out of 10. It was a little tricky guessing how much 2/3 of a cup was in ice cream scoops, but that was my only complaint. Number 6, the warranty. I always like a good warranty, and since it seems like we are past the days of lifetime warranties, anything over a year gets a thumbs up from me. The Cuisinart FastFreeze has a 3-year limited warranty, so 2 thumbs up, maybe 3. And finally, the miscellaneous information that is neither a pro or a con, but very helpful to have. You do want to make sure that you freeze the dessert cups on a level surface so that the mixing assembly can lock on properly. There's some wiggle room with the max line that they give you, but some mixes cause a bubble to form in the center while freezing, and you might have to chisel that away in order to get the mixing assembly to fit on. I tend to use my garage freezer for the initial freeze, and then transfer them to my fridge freezer once they're frozen at any angle they fit for easy access later. And second, I didn't get through all of them, but I did try a good number of the recipes in the manual. Most were delicious and fairly well balanced for the most part. I really liked the blueberry cheesecake frozen yogurt and the banana split protein ice cream. The chocolate protein ice cream was fine. My dad wanted it to be a little sweeter and I wanted it to be a little creamier, but overall it was fine. The frozen matcha latte was not good. It could just be the kind of creamer I used, but there's almost a cup of it in the whole mix, and all I tasted the whole time I was eating it was coffee creamer. I couldn't finish it because of that, and it felt like a waste of really good matcha because I used my good stuff for it. Okay, so final thoughts. Would I buy the Cuisinart FastFreeze over the Ninja Creami? Yes, but only because it is cheaper and it takes up way less space. I won't feel bad if I only use this once or twice a month because it only takes up a little tiny portion of my kitchen cabinets. I'm willing to part with that kitchen real estate if it means that I can have a really good milkshake whenever I want, or small batch sorbets with fresh summer fruit for my future self. And I'm actually really excited for that. For some people, I could see this replacing a couple of one-off appliances to actually save them space in their pantry. That said, if it was any larger or louder, I probably couldn't justify keeping it. I don't think I'm the person Cuisinart had in mind when they were designing the product, but I don't think it's a bad product. It just means someone else will probably find this more useful than I might. The prep time for traditional desserts just seems excessive to me for the number of servings that you get, especially with only 3 dessert cups. And there's not really a great way to make it more efficient except to do large batch versions, which kind of defeats the point. For non-traditional desserts though, this is definitely the way to go if you wanted to try high protein ice cream but can't justify the creamy price tag. I also would recommend it if you want to feel like you're still eating dessert while in a long-term calorie deficit. With that, I would love to hear your experience with the FastFreeze in the comments below. I know that there are some people who absolutely love the FastFreeze, and I love that for you. And then there are people like my husband who are really underwhelmed with the FastFreeze and wanted more from it. And then I think I'm somewhere in the middle, and it changes depending on what I'm making. But everyone has different use cases, and maybe yours will line up perfectly with someone else reading the comments and you could really help them out. If you have any questions about the FastFreeze, please leave them in the comments below and I will do my best to answer them. And again, I have affiliate links down there if you think that the FastFreeze or any of the accessories might be a good fit for you. Either way, if this video is helpful, I would appreciate you giving it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to see more content from me. My name is Alyssa. I am the recipe developer and content creator behind the Floral Apron, where I share easy to follow recipes with cleanup ratings on my website at floralapron.com. I share videos of how to make those recipes here on YouTube, along with a handful of product reviews like this one. Thank you again so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Ooh, did a good job on that one. Oh, I actually do need to clean this a little better. Sorry. Okay, as a whole, if you have any questions about the FastFreeze,